All right, so I just figured this was a good opportunity for me to demonstrate something. I had a student come to me and tell me that the um, the B on the clarinet um, wasn't working. So we're talking about this B down here. If you're a clarinetist, if you're not a clarinetist, sorry, it's all three on the top joint plus your thumb on the hole in the back and the register key. And then I've got some keys stripped off, but all three down here and this key down, the bottom pinky cluster key. And that produces a B, like a clarinet B, so concert pitch, C sharp. C sharp? No. Sorry. Anyway, I'm having a hard time remembering which direction I'm going there. It's a concert pitch A. Anyway, so they were having a problem with it. It wasn't sounding nicely for them. Everything else seemed to work, and it worked fine with the register key down. Now, I did find that a few of the keys, if you have a situation like that, a lot of the time there's a problem higher up on the clarinet. If it's not working down here, but it's working, it's just not working well, a lot of the time the leak is happening somewhere higher up. So I did find some of my side keys were a little bit airy. There was a little bit of leakage, so we adjusted those just a touch, and that was just really just a case of giving it a good press to make sure the pad was seated correctly. I did find a loose rod, so I tightened down that rod so that it's nice and tight, and everything's still moving just fine. Anyway, I stripped this off, and I didn't think to, push play on the recording till just now. But I wanted to push it because I noticed that, let's see if I can get this in view. So you see that little bit of wear on that pad. It's not on the bottom yet, but that tells me that that pad, you can kind of see it from the top, it's starting to fray. So we're starting to have a problem with pads starting to go. So the way these pads are made, and this one's the wrong size, so I can't replace it today. I can't show you that right now. But the way these pads are made, there's a cardboard backing. Oops, dropped it. Cardboard backing, and on the inside, there's a piece of felt, and that's wrapped in a bladder of fish skin, because fish skin seals nicely, kind of like your own skin does on the holes. So if that's torn and frayed, the air is going to escape through the felt. So anyway, this one's not doing that. It still sounds a touch airy on it, but that could also be because I'm using a borrowed barrel on this clarinet today, because the student didn't leave me the original barrel. So one of the things when you're diagnosing this is really identifying where's the problem. And I started that simply by, the student said it won't play this note. And I'm fortunate that that student knows what they're talking about. But beyond that, if I were to be diagnosing this with a student who didn't know, I would start playing and just looking for where it stopped making sound. And where it stops, that's where you start to look. So, oftentimes what you're pressing, you hold what your fingers are pressing, and you stop and you look at the clarinet and you go, okay, well, what's not connecting that should be connecting? What's supposed to move that isn't moving? So it helps to have a working clarinet beside you if you're not a clarinetist or you don't know how clarinets work. But having that said that, knowing that when I press down here, this key still moves. If I pressed this and this didn't lock up, that would be a problem. So, if this didn't seal properly, and sometimes you have to really get in there and look real careful, like, oh, that's just leaking a little bit there. That could be the problem. So you have to keep your eye on things like that. If it does come to pads, and I will do a pad video at some point, this pad is starting to go. And I know that because of two things. Even though there's no rips or tears in it, specifically, it's very discolored, which means that it's an old pad. It's been on there for a long time. These pads are supposed to be nice and white like this one, or This one is a little older, but it's still fairly white. The other thing I can tell about this pad being old is it's not the crinkly, but it's hard. There's no give to the pad anymore, and this pad still has some give. You want it to have some give. Pads are supposed to be soft. They're supposed to be squishy. They're supposed to be a cushion, kind of like the fat, fleshy part of your finger. So if a pad is hard, it's getting to the point where it's starting to go. It's compressed to the point where it's about time to replace it. So that pad is going to get replaced, and this pad is going to get replaced, but this one is not. This one's fine. And I will do a video showing how I replace those pads when I get the pads. I just don't have them here. So I'm going to reassemble this, and hopefully you can see how I do that. But I'm going to try and get a document camera, so I'm not using my phone for this. And yeah. Pin spring. Seam ripper. This one's maybe a little too big. Normally I have what's called a spring hook, or I can use a crochet hook, but I just push the pin spring right back on. So now this pad lifts when it's supposed to lift, which is normally. Now this one's going to be fun. This little key that goes right in this space doesn't fit nicely when you're trying to reseat the pin spring. So it helps to maybe use, like I'm using my screwdriver, just to pop the pin spring forward so that when I push this key into place, the spring seats correctly onto the key. And I'm just going to pop that into place. And that's not sitting nicely, so I'm going to muck with that for a moment, but we're going to get this sorted out. That explains that. So that spring didn't seat correctly. There we go. Now it's seated correctly. So you heard it snap. So this spring, little spring in here, and I don't think you can see that very well, but there's a little spring in here for this key, and it's supposed to keep this key closed until I push the button. Now this one, you can see it's got a little thing. It fits between these keys so that when they are depressed, this one's automatically moved. And this one needs to pop forward. Sorry, it's tough to see. And again, I will do a better video with a document camera so you can see everything that I'm doing nice and clear. But until I do that, I figured this was a good tide us over video. And so this one is going to be a pain in the rear. I'm going to try with the crochet or with the seam ripper to see if I can seat this spring. This one may require my actual spring hook, or at least a good crochet hook, which I'm in a high school, so I can go down to the fashion class and borrow one. Never discount what you can scrounge from your colleagues in other departments. Let's pop that spring forward. I missed it. But you can usually make do with this. So I thankfully don't need this clarinet anytime soon. I can probably make do without it for a couple of days. This is the off week for my music kids, so it's really just a question of having it ready for the for classes next week. So where a spring hook would be useful right now is that a spring hook has a little notch to pull the spring if you need to pull it, and it's got notches to push the spring if that's what you need to do. And I just got it. So that spring is now seated nicely. So if it's not working in one direction, go in another. I highly recommend, by the way, until you are confident doing this, there's the rod, and I will oil that rod just off camera. But I highly recommend finding a junker instrument in your school and stripping it down and reassembling it, and stripping it down and reassembling it, and doing that a couple times until you are confident and comfortable with knowing where all the bits and pieces go. Now, they're not going to be exactly the same instrument to instrument. Like this is a Noble clarinet, so okay, it's got certain features to it that are unique to Noble, and the way they do their screws and rods and all that kind of stuff. And it'll be very different from a Yamaha. But at the same time, you know, there are enough similar features. They're both boom system. There we go. And those similarities will make all the difference in the world. And my clarinet is reassembled.